Okay, great. We can get started now. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar entitled Building Immutable Backup as Your Last Line of Defense. My name is Sarah Wilson, and I'm going to be your host today. Today, we're focusing on the importance of immutable backup solutions in an increasingly threatened digital environment. And with us today, we have two speakers, Connor Scollard, who is the Technical Director for ECHO.
Hi, everyone.
And Gary Piggott, who is a little bit camera shy.
Hi there.
Who is a solution architect for backup and disaster recovery at ECHO. So I think let's just quickly go over today's agenda. So Connor's going to start off, and we're going to look at the current threat landscape and delve into the findings of the recent Veeam ransomware trends report for 2023. And then we're going to shift our focus to immutability, where we're going to discuss its essential features like stage restore and anomalous activity detection. Then we're going to look at a comprehensive overview of ECHO's solution to this very complex problem, and that's our ECHO Air Gap. And then last but not least, Gary is going to give us a live demonstration of the Veeam solution, and we're going to bring a bit of practice into our theory. And then finally, as always, we're going to be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So it's your opportunity to address any backup-related questions or concerns relevant to your business landscape. If you have any questions during the presentation, then please just use the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Okay, so then without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Connor Scollard for the first bit of the webinar.
Thanks, Sarah. So hi, everybody. Thanks for the nice intro there, Sarah, and keeping us on track, of course, which is always important. I have been known to ramble on these as I have spent the last 3 years working specifically in incident response for a lot of clients in Ireland. Apologies for that, went backwards. So I've been in the trenches. I've seen what it looks like on the receiving end, unfortunately, and what it takes to actually get a company back up and running after specifically a ransomware attack. Now, a lot of times we focus on ransomware specifically, but what I would like to bring to this perhaps is slightly different is things like insider threat protection as well, which you'll see actually in the trends report that I'm about to show in a minute, has become quite a significant number of the methods of breach for clients today. So as with all things, got to start with some qualifiers as to where we're coming from and what that kind of data looks like today. You're probably familiar of the Veeam ransomware trends report. The 2022 one was chock full of information, and now 2023 has expanded that in terms of the question sets and including the number of respondents as well. So the first thing, let's qualify the data. So this is 1,200 versus 1,000 last year were surveyed. And these are the kind of IT leaders who the actual organization they work in has suffered at least one, which is interesting to say as a sentence, at least one ransomware attack during the year. Across, as it says, 14 different countries. And so we've got a bigger sample size than previous. This kind of breakdown we have here of CISO or IT equivalent, backup admin, IT operations, and security professionals who have been responding to this kind of breakdown of what we're looking at today. So we're kind of covering a broad spectrum here. So the first thing that comes out of it for us that stood out to us, we wanted to talk about was automated testing. We're hearing a lot about AI and ChatGPT in the market at the moment, yet we're not talking about enough, I think, around automated testing. Now we have started to see it in some tenders for clients where they're talking about not just getting a backup successful report, as we see here, 60% of respondents said that that's currently the only method they have of validation, but we're starting to see the requests for automated restore testing, so of files and of entire virtual machines. But as you can see here, yeah, we have some clients with scripted-based restores to do file-based testing, which is at 44% of respondents, and unfortunately only 16% are saying that they're actually restoring the full system to make sure that that machine actually works successfully, with a mad no percent at the bottom there, no 4% at the bottom for validation. So really what we're saying there, the summary on the left-hand side is, yeah, 16% are actually doing routine tests. The rest are just relying purely on no or some level of report success based on the backup job itself. So we kind of think that that's probably not enough in today's market. So if we flip on to ransomware entries and targets, one I want to draw people's attention to is number 4, insider threat, i.e. disgruntled employee, which we're seeing there at 32% of respondents said that this is one of the methods that ransomware managed to enter their IT environment. Now, this is from the 2022 report. We didn't have the exact same question, unfortunately, in the 2023, so we couldn't relate the two. So good data hygiene, we're keeping this standalone for 2022. One thing you'll notice, of course, as well, that all the numbers don't add up to 100%, and that's because the respondents had the opportunity to answer with multiple answers. So while the initial ingress point might have been through phishing mail, for example, and that might have sat there for a period of weeks, then they might have found that, malicious software was deployed onto the environment and that credentials were then compromised, then secondary or tertiary actions then as the attacker moved laterally through the network. So that's not really surprising. There's probably nothing over there that's going to surprise people. What might be more interesting is on the right-hand side where we're talking about the specific targeted attacks, for example, against infrastructure itself. So we're seeing here 42% against Windows and VMware, and 38% targeting specific things like, okay, we've seen a lot about NAS appliances on the market. They're being attacked based on vulnerabilities that existed for quite some time, but we're also seeing things like databases being targeted directly. And the final remainder, 20% saying randomly opportunistic. We've seen enough attacks in the last 2-3 years where we're seeing an increase in those infrastructure-based attacks. So after they're going after the virtual machines, for example, that people are running on premise or even in the public cloud, we're starting to see where they're actually trying to get further down the line than that by pushing down to things like the hypervisor or even down to the physical storage layer or management layer of the physical infrastructure by attacking things like the iDRAC and the IMM and things like that of the relevant hardware from the different vendors. So those numbers are definitely increasing from what we're seeing as well within Echo. So one thing I always get asked whenever there's a ransomware attack by to one of our clients is how long is it going to take to recover? Now we can see here we've got a medley of different answers depending on the severity of the attack and the pervasiveness of the attack throughout the environment and how much recovery, but it's trending upwards is the bad news. So last year, the less than 1 week is what it took to entirely remediate an organization was at about 7%. Less than 1 week was at 24%. Those numbers are dropping, and we're starting to see the 2 weeks to 1 month and 1 to 2 months numbers starting to creep up, and the 2 to 4 months was only at 3% last year as well. So it's trending upwards. It's only taking longer. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. As mentioned, the targeted attacks themselves are therefore more damaging. There are more systems to clean. If you can imagine you had a hypervisor-based environment where only the Windows machines were attacked and the Linux machines were left alone, you might be able to easily determine as part of your remediation that in fact it's Windows machines that you need to focus on. Of course, you'll validate that the Linux ones are in fact uncompromised, but the Windows ones is where you're going to focus, but you might still have your hypervisor fully functional. With these more targeted attacks that we're starting to see, they might actually cause damage and changes to the hypervisor, which could then slow down the remediation effort from the IT team. The second piece that we're starting to see a change in there as well is that when people are using their cyber insurance to pay for the recovery and pay for all the effort that's needed from people like Echo to come and help, is that they're coming in with their own methodology for what's needed. So their criteria for what's deemed as clean. It's a very good reason for that. It's because when we move on to the pervasiveness here, the production data itself, the percentage, this is the percentage of overall what kind of data has been encrypted by the attackers. So, okay, we're seeing a small number there in the 0 to 20% of data is at 25. So a quarter of all data in an enterprise has been compromised there is showing about 25% of respondents. But we're seeing a much bigger number then for the 21 to 40. And of course, these attackers are looking at the environment and they know what they're doing. So they're generally going after the key kind of tier 1 data, the stuff that's really going to hurt the company, especially if they're going to want to exploit that data and try and sell it afterwards. Now, if we talk about how do people recover if they pay, regardless of whether or not cyber insurance is involved, we're able to see on the right-hand side, we got 49% saying yes, they did pay and they were able to recover the data. There's a very scary number on the left there, 21% saying, yeah, we did pay, but we still couldn't recover. Now, this comes down to an increasing trend we're seeing at the moment in what we're calling malicious destruction by the attacker. So I'll talk about that just because it's happening right now in what we're seeing in ransomware response. So traditionally, we would think that where the 49% there is that the customers are able to recover. We would think that ransomware and ransomware as a service is generally, we're told, designed that you will have confidence and you will trust in the attackers, and that if you give them the keys, give them the payment, that they will give you the keys to decrypt your data and get back online, right? And that they have really good customer service is one of the things we're told. And they will really help to get you back online because you've been kind enough to pay them the money. We're only seeing that in 50%. But what we're seeing now increasingly is that, no, the 21% still couldn't recover. And it's due to things like, for example, where now the attackers are going after the hypervisor infrastructure. So we had a client who had a full HCI stack, and they had a backup server elsewhere that wasn't stored in an immutable fashion. The attackers attacked the whole infrastructure and deleted the HCI configuration itself and reset everything to factory defaults, and actually replaced the operating system with just a Windows default OS with a screen on it saying, you know, pay us a lot of Bitcoin. So what that meant in terms of the recovery side is that the team had to look at the hardware, go through all the logs at, say, the root level from things like the IDRAC access, destroy that entire VMware environment after having captured whatever data they needed to for forensic investigation, and then rebuild the entire thing from scratch. Now, this is all while the timer is ticking down from the attacker saying, well, you've got 48 hours to pay, which isn't great, especially when you're talking about an infrastructure being built that traditionally you might have had a consultant company come in like Echo to provision for you over a duration of weeks. And now you're figuring out that you have to do it all within 2 days to even understand if your backups are useful. So this is where the malicious destruction piece that we're seeing now is kind of designed to hamper our ability to even look at our infrastructure and say, yeah, we're pretty confident we can recover. So they're trying to drive up people's ability to pay, only to find out that, well, even though you've paid and you've been given a decryptor, your entire production infrastructure has been destroyed and you have to actually rebuild it as well, which isn't great when you think about it from a service perspective, but it's a recent trend. So of those who did pay, we're seeing insurance still be the biggest factor there, which is why, and I'm sure you're all aware, we're seeing a much bigger push from insurance providers to validate the security posture of an organization today when they're trying to get cyber insurance. And now we're seeing ransomware as well be specifically added on as an amendment, sorry, excuse me, to a cyber insurance agreement where they're going to have specific questions around your ability to recover in the event of an attack. So it's getting harder and it's getting more challenging. It's getting more challenging to get that kind of cover from our cyber insurance providers. So, well, what are we saying we're going to do about that? So if we look at what Veeam specifically are doing, and that's the goal of today, as we use Veeam as our flagship product here to help our clients protect themselves from ransomware, and Echo our platinum cloud service provider. Well, we're looking at this trusted immutability everywhere approach. So we don't believe that it's sufficient enough to have one place with immutable data. Our architecture is designed using Veeam to have immutability the whole way across the stack. So where we have an on-site Veeam server, for example, we have our 5 key tenants isolated for in an appliance that we supply to our clients today that helps with the standard methodology of lateral movement by an attacker. So, for example, we would always have an actual appliance sitting on premise with our clients. that would actually store the data, but that would not be using the same authentication layer, so that if authentication has been compromised, that the attacker can't get access to this appliance. We'd also have it stored separately on the network so that only our Veeam servers can actually talk to our Veeam servers, and that no other servers like a remote desktop host or a user's laptop could talk to our repository as well. And that way we're kind of ensuring that that credential compromise or device compromise piece doesn't mean that the attackers can in fact find the Veeam server. We also keep the storage completely separate from production by having it on a physically separate appliance. And we're also able to shift all of that data in a one-to-one relationship to what we would store in our cloud. And that's important because a lot of the strategies from some providers out there involve having a local retention on premise for a short period of time and then kind of archiving and tiering it off to a cloud provider like Echo. We believe that there should be a one-to-one relationship in that data. Now, we do have the optional capability here of having a public cloud data storage for something like long-term archiving, but we would always subscribe to the 3-2-1 rule, where we want to have the data stored with a one-to-one relationship or as much as possible for our clients. So in the event of a attack, for example, with ransomware, if someone has been sitting on the network for 2 or 3 weeks, we'd want to be able to restore from the on-premise appliance where possible, so that we can speed up that restore. If we're having to trunk everything down from our cloud or from the public cloud, that will obviously slow down that time to restore and the TTR, the total time to recovery, which we don't want to do. Secondly, in the case of a security investigation, the question is always going to be posed around, well, when was the data safe? Okay, what date can we go back to as our recovery point? So what we found in the past is that security analysts would determine a point of infection as, let's say it was last Tuesday, and then say let's start restoring from the Monday. However, as this is a live investigation, they may determine that in fact it actually wasn't safe on Tuesday. You've got to go back to the previous Friday. Now, if we're pulling all that data down from the cloud, we're going to stop that and restart that, and that's purely from a data restoration for ingestion perspective. So where we have the local appliances and we have this hardened immutable repository locally, we're able to quickly spin up and assess the health of that data in the event of one of these attacks, and help even the security teams understand that actually we could see those indicators of compromise that they had found on the machine, maybe on a Tuesday or on a Monday, and we could help them determine that maybe, in fact, we need to go back to the previous Friday. We're able to do it at that kind of pace, which is great, and that kind of speeds up the recovery time. So while that's very manual in the event of a restore, what we're seeing is that the clean restoration process is also changing. So in 2022, these numbers look again quite different, in that the sandboxing perspective they're seeing at 44% was only down in the low 30s, and restore back to production and immediately scanned was also was like a late 20s, early 30s. So what we're seeing here is that where cyber insurance providers are getting involved and where security companies are getting involved as well, there's definitely a better awareness now of the need to restore into a kind of a staging area or a sandbox in order to clean the data, right? So maybe the antivirus, anti-malware product has missed the initial infection and has missed the malware, or maybe it wasn't even malware, maybe it was some legitimate software used for illegitimate purposes. But then in the case of a sandbox environment, normally the security partner is going to want to bring on a really, really strong locked down EDR solution that is designed and has been tuned to spot those IOCs. So that number is increasing, the ability to then restore into a nice sandbox environment and then test the data and make sure that in fact is clean, and then moving that back to production. Okay, we're seeing some people restoring to production immediately and then just scanning it because they're confident perhaps that the infection only came in at a certain point of time and they've gone back to a day before that. But we do still see a lot of customers who don't even have those options, right? They're just saying they just restored it back and kind of hope for the best, unfortunately. Now that would definitely, those numbers would trend higher in the smaller organizations. So this ability to test and restore is a key piece. So there's new features that brought out in, I think it was the last version of Veeam. Yeah. Whereby we're able to do our stage restores using a thing called data labs. So what we got here is a typical ransomware attack. Left-hand side, okay, we've got data encrypted. We've determined the scope of infection and the initial indicators of compromise as mentioned. And then what we're doing now is we're creating a sure backup job to verify that the data that we have in our backups is in fact safe. So we'll go through a process here, an automated process of attaching the backup disks to a server that has this good EDR software on it, which has been tuned around those IOCs. It will test, and actually, in fact, if it detects that there's malware on the machine, it will power it off and run back to the previous backup automatically by itself. So continuously doing this testing procedure for us as we're doing restoration. What that's very useful for is mostly because, number one, we can help obviously detect if there is malware inside the backups, but the malware itself might have moved laterally at different points in time into the infrastructure. So you might find you got a domain controller from Tuesday, but you might have had a SQL Server from Wednesday, and therefore you're looking at less data loss, less data replay that needs to be done by the organization as well. Sometimes that can be useful. Sometimes it might not be, depending on some of the data might have gone stale if it goes back too far. But we're able to get some really good ideas that we can present back and say, look, we know these recovery points look good on these servers. That's one of the new features. Gary's going to show us a demonstration of this later, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. I just want to point out that this capability now exists as we're starting to see the backup products themselves, like Veeam, moving more towards enabling and helping the security part of a business rather than seeing them sitting in silos. The second place we're starting to see that as well is in this anomalous activity detection. So again, beauties of some machine learning is we're starting to spot behaviors. We've seen it with the move from anti-malware solutions to EDR solutions, where we're putting behavior-based analytics on servers and devices. Well, now we're starting to see the same kind of thing follow through into Veeam, where we're able to tell, and Gary will show this as well, where we're able to tell if we can spot possible ransomware activity either at a hypervisor level, as per this print screen, or maybe even in the backup itself that's been recently backed up. So we might be able to actually spot that there is in fact encrypted files in the backup. So there are kind of two ways that the Veeam are helping. And I don't want to talk too much about that without stealing Gary's thunder as mentioned. So I'm going to move on to how we're taking those kind of problem statements from the beginning, plus now these new features in Veeam, and rolling it into what we have, and we're calling our air gap. So some of you might be aware of, it's a solution we have today, and we've had it for the last number of years, designed specifically in response to ransomware incidents that I was running, whereby we had to roll in an immediately immutable solution into a customer environment, having had suffered a ransomware attack as we were bringing equipment back online, and obviously bringing it into that kind of hybrid network of, do we trust it, do we not, while still making sure that the backup itself can't get infected again. Reinfection being one of the key things you never want to have happen in the event of an attack. So to that end, we have this air gap service, whereby we have an immutable repository sitting on premise, sitting on the left-hand side of this diagram, and all of the customer infrastructure sitting on the right, whether it be public cloud or on-premise. We have the Veeam processing server and a hardened repository running on this all-in-one appliance, which can be raising in size from 10, 20, 40, 80, 150 terabytes. But we also have the ability to do a custom one as is necessary for our clients. It's a Dell EMC box. We provide it as a fully managed service, whereby we take care of all the patching, not just of the Veeam software as well, but of everything, including the firmwares and stuff that sit on the actual physical appliance as well. We can provide that service to the Echo Cloud, which can run through all of our regional data centers. And is fully managed and monitored by our staff in Echo. So the key features of that being, yes, we have that hardened Linux repository both on-premise and in the cloud. I showed you in the previous slide that we have the ability to also look at object storage if we need to use it. But we normally maintain this one-to-one relationship here, and we can scale it to object storage if someone wants a third copy. We use the insider protection features within Veeam to help us with that in the cloud. So what we're able to do is provision a job and say that we want this data to not be deleted for 30 days. Even if an administrator really wants to, we can't do it. So obviously we have to be careful of our jobs that we're going to create, especially when people are doing data migrations. If they're going through something like a data deduplication, that might bloat the infrastructure during that kind of period. So obviously with ourselves and Echo, we can kind of expand that as we need to for our clients and allow that to organically come back to normal as well. So be careful of that 30-day lock piece is what I would advise anyway. But if it's 30 days, you choose, of course, so we can choose a lot higher than that. We also make sure, and we've tested this with our security teams in Echo, that there's no access to the appliance. So we have a firewall sitting on the appliance itself, preventing any access inbound from you, but also from an attacker, right? So part of that lateral movement piece that we're trying to protect against, which is that we don't run this service on your hardware, we don't run it inside your network, and we don't use your authentication layer. These are the traditional methods an attacker will use to try and compromise the system. And as mentioned, on the right-hand side there, we have support for Windows, Linux, VMware, and Hyper-V, as well as the classic public cloud providers listed on the top right-hand corner. Now, so that's a bit about the way we're using it. Now, Gary's going to show those features regarding how we're going to bring some of that new stuff as part of our version 2. But some key takeaways before that happens is, well, one, use the immutability features within Veeam. That way you don't even need to pay the ransom in the first place. We're still seeing far too many people paying because they actually didn't store their data in a immutable fashion. Test them automatically and reduce that workload, obviously, while increasing the frequency of testing. So not asking a service provider like Echo, hi, can you do a restore for me once a month or once a week? When we can now just automate this and have it happen on a nightly basis if we need to, and if we have the time within the window. And lastly, and it's a key one now, is that if we take those features and we're able to build this kind of cleaning system to be able to restore a VM and actually be able to clean it and determine that it's clean, is build that in advance and make sure that your cyber insurance provider knows about it, so that if in the event, God forbid, of a ransomware attack or insider threat, that you have a method that's already pre-approved. So they're not going to come in and try and reinvent the wheel and slow the whole thing down. They're going to say, okay, yeah, you've got it well documented. I see that over there. That's a good way to do it. And I see there you have a methodology for screening for the IOCs that the security partner brings with them. So I've got to bring it over to Gary now, because he's going to bring us through the demonstration. Hope I haven't saw too much of thunder there, Gary, but good luck with that.
All a bit, but not too much. So just give me a second here. I'll just share my screen. So what we have here is we've got a Veeam desktop. Veeam is available in 3 different tiers, starting at foundation level, going up through advanced and up to premium. Most of what I'm going to cover here today is in the foundation layer. You don't need to buy the extra features, but I will touch on them from time to time, just to show you the additional functionality you can deliver around monitoring and automation to get better outcomes, both for validating your backups and also the recoveries from ransomware attacks. So first off, we're on the repository screen here. We've got a number of repositories configured. We've got a regular Veeam repository, which is actually on the local system. That's this one here at the top. At the bottom, we have what's called a hardened repository, and this is the one that does all the immutability that Connor was talking about earlier. And then we also have a Cloud Connect repository configured. This is sitting in Echo's public cloud, where we store an offsite copy of the backup. So a default, a standard backup repository can be any local attached disk on a Windows or a Linux system. It can be a NAS, or you also get options around purpose-built storage appliances. They're great, but they're not very secure, because the first thing you can do is, if the data is shared over SMB or NFS, you can just delete that data. So with a hardened repository, first off, there's a number of ways to do it. Veeam recommend using their Linux hardened repositories. So the key thing there is that it's a single purpose Linux system. Everything is switched off except for the Veeam functionality. The Veeam transport is the only thing that's accessible outside the system. That Veeam transport is running as a restricted user. So even if it is compromised, the amount of damage that can be done is severely limited. So it's a very secure hardened system. There are other options around secure repositories, but they have a much wider attack surface. than a stripped out Linux server. You know, if you're using a general purpose NAS, there are ways to compromise those that are well known by attackers, but an absolutely stripped out hardened Linux system is a very hard thing to crack. So when we talk about immutability in this context, what Veeam does is every time it writes a backup file to one of these repositories, it gives it a retention window, so or a lifetime. So that lifetime can be 7 days, it can be 2 weeks, and then within that time frame, the file can be written, and can be read, but it cannot be deleted. So in the highly unlikely event that even your hardened repository, your Veeam installation is compromised, the attacker cannot get into the repository and cannot delete that critical data. You don't want to leave the immutability too long because, as Connor mentioned, you end up storing a large amount of data. You know, you see, I've seen, you know, some customers set it to a year and then realize, you know, that they need to shrink it down and can't and get into trouble. Typically, you'll have it set to a week or 2 weeks, but you always want it at least as long as the gap between your full backups, because you don't want to have a situation where your newest full backup is deleted and you only have incrementals left because you can't recover from that. So if you're doing an incremental or if you're doing a full backup every week, you want to have your immutability at least a week. So it's configured very simply here. So we just waited for it to connect. But it will show you that in this case, it's only 7 days. So just give it a sec. Okay, so the repository is configured to make backups immutable for 7 days. So you can delete, when you attempt to delete files, it'll delete everything older than 7 days, which allows Veeam to do its housekeeping, to prune its data, all that kind of stuff. But any files written in the last 7 days will be stored. So just to show you the difference in the behavior, I've got 2 identical backup jobs here, one to a hardened repository, one to the regular repository, and they're both showing here. You know, an attacker, the first thing he's going to do is he's just going to right click on these backup chains and select delete from disk. And within 30 seconds, they're gone. Simple as that. So you'll see it pop up there, and it's going to remove that data. Those backups are gone, never to be recovered. They're not sitting in a recycle bin, they're gone. But when you try to do the same thing with a hardened backup repository, anything that's still within that 7-day window is going to be retained. And the attacker has no way to get from the Veeam server to the repository to do anything else because that repository is hardened. So just see here, it's just going through the deletion, they're gone. You attempt to do the same thing on the hardened repository. And it starts the same way, but you're going to see an error very quickly saying these files cannot be deleted until a date. So it's attempting to remove those backups. And it's going to fail within the next few seconds. So there you go. So the backup files can be deleted after 7 days from now. So that's a backup survive. So even though the attacker will have access to the Veeam server, if he has access to the Veeam server, he can't go and delete these hardened backups. So that's really immutability. You know, it's a fairly simple concept. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to show you how, if you've had an attack and you need to recover from attack, what you can do to actually scan those systems during the restore. The feature we're going to talk about here is the secure restore feature. So I'm just going to select to restore AVM. So we're going to restore to a new location. We don't want to overwrite the existing one, obviously, because this is a ransomware event. So just going to give it a name. So we can obviously restore these to the existing network, but you don't want to do that. You'll probably restore to a DMZ or leave it totally disconnected. The next feature here is the secure restore function. So this is where we're going to do the scanning. Okay. So once we tick this box, we've a few options here. So when the restore starts, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to do an instant restore of the disks and attach them to a mount server. Now, a mount server can be the same system as the Veeam host, or in a lot of cases, but in a ransomware recovery, you're going to want this to be a dedicated system that's isolated. That mount server is going to run your EDR tool of choice. out of the box, you've got support for Symantec, Bitdefender, Windows Defender even, Kaspersky and ESET, but you can also use tools like CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, Carbon Black, any of the high-end EDR tools that you want to use to remediate these advanced ransomware attacks. So what it'll do is it will mount those disks to the mount server. It'll do a full scan. And then once the scan is complete, if it passes and it's healthy, you can promote that server back into your production environment. Or if it fails, you can park it to one side. And as well as that, with the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, which is a feature that's only available in the Platinum version of Veeam, you can actually automate that as well. So if the most recent backup restore point is infected, it will automatically go to the next newest one and back and back and back until it finds a clean restore point and promote that to production. So you can automate the entire process. And actually you can build full recovery plans using the recovery orchestrator as well, so you can automate the process of recovering from a ransomware attack. This is what Connor mentioned earlier, where if you develop this plan, you get it approved by your insurers, you can shrink that 3.4 weeks of recovery time down to days or hours in some cases by having a fully automated recovery plan ready to go in the case of a ransomware attack. So what's going to happen here is when I hit finish, it's going to start that process. It's going to attach the VM to the mount server, start the virus scanning process, and then depending on the health of the server, it'll either promote it back to production or fail it, and then give us a report. So that's how you recover clean systems every time in the event of a ransomware attack with Veeam. So that's great for the recovery after the fact, but the more important, you want to actually know about a ransomware attack as soon as possible during it. So the best thing to do there is regular testing and scanning. Okay, so there's another feature, a related feature of Data Labs called Sure Backup. What Sure Backup allows you to do is after backup finishes or on a schedule, whichever way you choose to do it, it will take the virtual machine or a group of virtual machines, if they're interconnected, need to be tested together. It will then bring them up every day or after every backup, if that's the way you want to do it. Again, do that ransomware scan, but also run, you can do ping tests. You can make sure the the VMware heartbeat is received. You can run test scripts against these groups of servers to make sure that there's no ransomware, that the backups are intact. You can even do disk integrity checks using Sure Backup. So that's this feature here, Sure Backup. So I'm just going to edit the config just so we can drill down into what you actually have around options. So the virtual lab is the concept. This is an isolated sandbox, basically, where you can put it on any host you want. That could be your production infrastructure. It can be your DR infrastructure. You can configure the networks whatever way you want and restore into that location. Application groups then is all about multiple systems together. So if you're bringing up a platform that's spread across multiple systems, you can decide which one gets booted first and manage it that way. So they're all tested together. And then you can also link it to a backup job. And then within each, this is where you configure what tests you want to run. So some CAN tests to check to test, DNS servers, domain controllers, mail servers, database servers, all that kind of stuff. You then configure if you wanted it to have all the resources it would have, how long it's going to take to boot. And then the basic tests here, it'll make sure the VM heartbeat is present, so it's booted successfully. And you can also do ping tests to make sure the network is working. And then you can run scripts. So there's a few CAN scripts here, as shown on the previous screen, but you can develop your own scripts and run them against the Sure Backup systems. And then every time the test runs, it'll run those scripts. It'll send you an email report telling you whether it was successful or failed. So not only that your backups ran successfully, but that you can recover from them automatically with a one-click go to actually get back up and running very quickly. So that's Sure Backup. Now, I mentioned we're going to touch on some optional tools. So the one I want to focus on is Veeam 1. Now, Veeam 1 is included with the advanced and the platinum version of Veeam. So what it does is it's plugged into the Veeam backup server, and it's also plugged into your VMware or Hyper-V environment. And this is the main UI. So what it does is It's continuously monitoring the performance of your backup platform and your virtualization platform, and looking for indicators that will trigger alarms. In the context of ransomware, there's two very important things we want to keep an eye on. First, Veeam out of the box will very easily spot anomalous backup sizes. So if you have a ransomware attack in progress, it's going to start encrypting data. That's a massive amount of change. So you're going to see a spike in the size of the incremental files. So what Veeam will do is, as soon as it detects one of those spikes, it's going to throw an alert. So we have one here, suspicious incremental backup size. So it's detected that there was a big change, an unusually big change. In this case, it was 237% of the normal average size of the incremental backup. And that displays an alert on screen and triggers an email that gets sent to the admin team. So you know there's something going on with those servers. If you choose to integrate with your virtual infrastructure, it'll do that in a more, like, what you're going to see here is you're only getting alerted when the backup runs. If you only run a backup once a day, it could be too late. So if you want to have some live monitoring, what you can do is you can plug it into your VMware infrastructure. And what we have here is another test. So again, it's watching those virtual machines for suspicious activity, high CPU usage coinciding with high disk IO, and again, triggering an alert. So what we have here is we have an alert that there was suspicious activity, possibly indicative of a ransomware attack detected. And as soon as that happened, it fired off an email to the admins. So again, giving you the earliest possible alert that there's something going on with your network, that you could have a ransomware attack in progress at the time. So that's what Veeam can do in around immutability, how to detect a ransomware attack in progress and recover afterwards. So yep, that's all I have. So Sarah, if you want to jump in.
Thanks so much, Gary, and thank you, Connor, as well. We're nearly out of time, but let me just, I think we can do one or two questions. This one was asked twice. Connor, I'll give this to you. How would a company go about moving from a general Veeam license to Echo Air Gap?
Good news is it's not hard to do. If you have an existing license, we can plug straight into that with our service provider licensing and see out that contract as it is that you have, that you've already paid for. And then whenever that duration finishes, we can flip over to our licensing model. And that would help with allowing the Veeam to continue to run. Where we would probably find the changes, the biggest impact to a customer there would be that when we provide the on-site appliance, there'll be a kind of a natural progression of the data over. So we could connect to the existing Veeam server, pull the configuration of backups that we need to, and get access to the current data sets that are stored on whatever repository they're using. But then obviously transition that across throughout the protection groups that we have, transition that data across onto our physical infrastructure as well, to help in case they were running on some old tin or on their own production infrastructure previously.
Okay, thanks, Connor. And quickly, a question for you, Gary. What is involved with Echo Air Gap 2.0? Okay, so with 2.0, we're adding in an easier way to use those sure backup features, where we can do the continuous testing of the infrastructure on the on the Air Gap appliance itself. So you got all that happening within the appliance. You don't have to provision your own infrastructure. So it's just a change in the config. We're also just exposing more of the Veeam functionality around those options. So that's really what's coming in. It'll still be as secure as before, as air-gapped as before, but with version 1.0, a lot of the advanced functionality of Veeam was isolated back behind that firewall. So we're just exposing that to the customer.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. I'm going to close it off now. We're just a little bit over time. So thank you to our speakers, Connor and Gary, and thanks you guys for attending. As a follow-up, tomorrow you're going to be getting an email. We will send you a link to the recording of the webinar in case you want to pass it on to any of your colleagues, or if you want to check something. We're also going to give you the link to the Veeam ransomware trends report that you see on your screen that Connor spoke about. But, in the meantime, if you have any follow-up questions, then you can get in touch with us on the contact page of our website. And over the next week or so, we're going to be doing some outreach to help us tailor future sessions in this series on backup and recovery solutions. So we'd appreciate your feedback on that.
Yeah.
So, goodbye from us. And thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye now. Thanks a lot.
Bye.